Welcome to Season 6 of National Parks Presents. Today is our third of six presentations, so we are halfway through. We will be here every other Wednesday from now until the end of March, so we just have three more after this. This is a program that began in the branches. We were all in person in branches, and then the pandemic hit, small little thing called the pandemic. And then we moved to Zoom and we stayed online. We decided that you guys are here and we went where the people went. So I'm very excited that we are here online with you today. The past few years, the BPL has been slowly marching its way to the 250th anniversary of the revolution. The year before, we focused on revolutionary music. Last year we focused more on revolutionary art, and this year we're diving all in, guys. We're diving all in on all things revolutionary. We're going to celebrate the actual anniversaries of these dates, and we're also celebrating the revolutionary ideas that have never stopped actually coming out of this. So, we are celebrating all things. We are recording this presentation and past ones and past seasons. You are welcome to go check those presentations out on the Boston Public Library YouTube page. Honestly, the best way to find it is to Google Boston Public Library YouTube, and it's the most predominant playlist on the YouTube page because I don't know if you guys know this. I've only said it every presentation for the past six seasons. This is my favorite program of all time. So I was like, no, we need a big playlist. So that is where it will be. One thing this year is we are doing a Q&A chat box. Now, guys, usually you're a real talkative crew, and it's my favorite thing in the world. You're always like, ooh, yes, I have questions. But the past two presentations, you've been a little quiet. I'm like, is everyone okay? What do we need? And I think it's because we're not used to the Q&A chat box. So when when the question pops up in your head as Ranger Nathan is going through his presentation, just pop it in the chat. Because what ends up happening is we think no one has questions, and we're like, okay, here's the end. Excuse me, here's the end. And then we're like, okay, I guess there are no questions. And we say goodbye, and then all of your questions kind of hit, and you guys are typing it away furiously, and they all come in as we're all leaving. So make sure you get them in during the presentation. That would be wonderful. And per usual, remember to be respectful, which all of you are, because you're great. Um, if you're not a fan of the captions, you can turn off the captions by hitting that CC button below and hitting turn off subtitles. And I think that is all I have from me. So without further babbling from me, let's welcome Ranger Nathan as he presents The World Must Be Safe for Democracy, Black Soldiers in World War One. Yay!
Thank you so much for that handoff. I also appreciated the music at the end. It just really gets me hype. Um, Welcome, everyone. I will say that this is my first virtual presentation in about 5 or 6 years, so go ahead and just bear with me as I might fumble along the way, but we'll get through it. We will get through it till the end. It is also my goal to kind of have about a 40 to 45-minute conversation or kind of discussion this evening. That way, as was stated, it opens up the room for questions because I enjoy questions. I love answering questions. But anyways, we are going to get started here with World War One, the Black soldiers who served during World War One. And as the title suggests, this is going to be The World Must Be Made Safe for Democracy. And we'll come back to that just a little bit later. And I just want to kind of make you all aware of the purpose and kind of where I'm coming from in terms of this talk. So the purpose of, as was mentioned, we are having a big year, a big 250th year commemoration of American revolutionary events highlighted by the Declaration of Independence. And as such, the National Park Service and multiple partners are here for the idea of what is the next 250 years for us? What have we learned from the past that really sets us up for the present? And where are we going into the future with? So my connection to the American Revolution is just what is the legacy of the values that make the United States the United States? How are we in the midst of those values with World War One and discussing Black soldiers during World War One? And then kind of leaving off with the thought, what does the next 250 years have for us? And I'm going to do that by kind of talking in the lens as if I'm talking about the 54th Massachusetts, which is a story I'm more familiar telling on the Black Heritage Trail. But I want to look at this event, these 4 years, this era of World War One through a social context, through a little bit of a political context, through a military complex, absolutely. But I kind of want to show and tie all this together just to give a broad overview of the world in which these soldiers lived in and participated in this event. So before we get into that, I just want to lead off with what really got me started in diving down to this topic. And it's only going to be a couple minutes here before we get jumping into the meat of this program. But again, on the Black Heritage Trail, we start off at this monument, the 54th Massachusetts, and I primarily study 19th century American history, United States history. And as you can imagine, that is really highlighted by the American Civil War, 4 years of an American war, which afterwards leads to a lot of fight over historical memory. It leads to a lot of fight with monuments and memorials afterwards. So this picture right here just kind of encapsulates where I got interested from this subject is that we have this 54th Massachusetts in the Common across from the State House. If you go throughout the rest of the Common, you have a monument to the soldiers and sailors of the Civil War. You have a monument to Crispus Attucks and the other victims of the Boston Massacre. You have an art piece of Martin Luther King Jr. embracing his wife, which may in a few years be called a memorial or a monument, but right now it's an art piece. And then if you go elsewhere, you just see statues dotted with important figures for one reason or another, dotting the Common, dotting the public garden, and really in a lot of spaces throughout Boston. And one of my thoughts was, where's World War One? When I first came to Boston, I knew about near Fenway Park, there was a memorial garden for Korean War, World War II, Vietnam War, but I really never saw anything that was directly connected to World War One. So I wanted to figure out a little bit more of that. And then I was walking to one of my programs, walking up these steps that you see here, and I noticed something out of the corner of my eye that on the stairs there was a quote, or I'm sorry, a line, and it's called "The Liberty Mall, dedicated October 27th, 1917, to our soldiers and sailors in the Great War." So it kind of left me thinking, I mean, is this it? Is this the memorial? Is this the monument to those men and women who sacrificed and served during World War One? So I kind of dug into it a little bit more, and I won't talk a whole bunch on it because there's already a BPL article presentation about it. But there was an idea, or there was a thought, there was a plan in place to construct a monumental memorial to World War One and those individuals who served during World War One. It was going to span the Charles River. It was going to be on top of an artificial river, and it was just going, or it was going to be an artificial island, I'm sorry, and it was just going to span the Charles River, connecting one side of Boston to the side of the Cambridge area. So I'm like, okay, what was going on with this? What happened to this? Essentially, through a different talking points conversation, it was decided that the city itself, the city of Boston, should not be the sole individual responsible for building a memorial. Instead, they believed it should be the state's responsibility. So that is where Greylock Reservation and then this monument atop Mount Greylock, which is called the Veterans War Memorial Tower, was constructed and kind of came to being. And this was dedicated in 1933. So this is the monument that's out in the western part of the state in roughly the Adams area, Adams, Massachusetts. That is the dedication for World War One, and then multiple different wars and multiple different veterans. And this is great. This is a great monument. However, it seems out of the way. It seems out of the city center. It seems out of view, which gets into a different conversation about why is this out of view, and then kind of coming back full circle to monuments. I'm thinking that in the future we might have a little bit better hope because just recently in Washington D.C., this World War One plaza, this World War One monument got really enhanced to not only the monument that you see in front of you, but it's an entire courtyard with the theaters, with individuals, the divisions, and really breaks it down into the women's role, European role, Canadian role, American war, and then role, and then it even talks about the Black experience during World War One. And so from there, it got me talking about, well, what is the African American role during World War One? Specifically, what is the role with Massachusetts in World War One, and were there any African American men who served in World War One from Massachusetts? This is a picture outside Camp Devon, Devons, I'm sorry, with drafted men essentially waiting in line outside of barracks to go into Devens and to start their training. And this picture is important because not only does it show individuals, it shows that they're in very proper attire. It almost seems like they're coming off their work to enlist, but it shows that there are dedicated individuals that even with everything that's going on in the world, all of the misplaced policies or all of the division that is within the United States at that time, that there is a lot of outpouring support to make this world safe for democracy. And shown by this picture here. So these men are going to be drafted individuals, as I mentioned, and they're going to be in the same footsteps or following the same footsteps of Company L, 6th Massachusetts National Guard. And that is who we're going to focus on through the larger view of men who served in World War One, who served with the 93rd Division, primarily the 372nd Regiment or the Infantry Regiment. And that is going to be, again, where the Massachusetts National Guard Company L are going to be a part of, that group that they're going to be a part of. So now that we have my interest, where it led me to these individuals, where it led me to these men, and kind of the support that they're going to have for the war, I want to take a step back and talk about the world in which they lived in. I want to talk about just briefly what's going on, not only again from a political standpoint, but from a social standpoint. And again, this is just exactly how I would talk about the 54th Massachusetts if I was talking purely about the 54th Massachusetts. It's great to focus on their war experience, but their war experience is not happening in a closed vacuum. It's happening as a part of a larger conversation, a larger movement that's really going on within the United States. So we're just going to take a step back. Initially, the United States are going to declare a sense of neutrality or declare neutrality. They're not going to involve themselves with World War One. In fact, that's actually going to be a campaign message that really promotes Woodrow Wilson, the president during this time frame, into his reelection. He kept us out of war. That is one of the biggest slogans that's going to be used during his reelection. He kept us out of war. However, due to European threats in the Western Hemisphere, due to attacks on shipping vessels and other vessels in the Atlantic Ocean, and due to other situations that are slowly occurring, slowly happening, he reaches out to Congress in 1917 and asks for a declaration of war, knowing that Congress is the only body who can declare a war. So he's going to ask them, and he's going to say that we need this declaration of war because the world must be made safe for democracy. Its peace must be planted upon the tested foundations of political liberty. And that's kind of one of his big takeaway points, one of his big takeaway phrases from his speech in Congress, that we need to establish a better foundation or a stronger foundation for democracy, not only at home and abroad. There is a standing military at this time. However, it's small in relative context or relative terms to what is needed. He needs to grow that army, which is again why they have enlistments, and then again why they go to the draft. They need a larger army. African American men are going to again be drafted and serve not only on the front lines but the SOS, which are services of supply. But we'll come back to that a little bit later. And now, before jumping into Company L, again, just kind of going based off of what's going on and looking more at a social lens now, getting away from the politics a little bit, there this is an era of large movements. We have migration coming from the south into the north. This is known as the Great Migration, where you have populations, large numbers of African Americans who are moving to the north and looking for jobs in industry, getting away from agricultural based jobs, looking for jobs in industry, thinking that this is going to lead to a more prosperous future, not only in economic wealth, but through means of social, individual, and educational opportunities. There is a lot of work and a lot of thought out there about what is the value and how valuable education is to elevating oneself and then populations into a larger role and a more aware role, a more social and political active role within your communities. It all boils down to education. So they're hoping for these opportunities as they're taking part in this great migration to northern cities industry. There is a lot of tension, though, as these populations are moving north. And this is where we're going to talk about segregation within the United States. And I just want to take a pause here because I mentioned that this great migration is happening from the south to the north. But even though we like to think that the Civil War divides a slave institution compared to a free institution, slavery is a national issue, and segregation was no different. Segregation was a national issue that happened in the South just as well as it happened in the North. And so these two pictures here kind of just emphasize this segregation that is alive in both the South and the North. On the left, or my left, it is going to be a poster for the birth of a nation. The birth of a nation was a major picture during this time frame, and it displays racial stereotypes in which Black citizens were portrayed as corrupt, savage, and violent. And on the opposite end, you have white actors and white organizations such as the KKK were portrayed as heroic figures protecting society from the menace of Black men. And just kind of further emphasize where where the Wilson administration stood on this point, the birth of a nation was shown in the White House. And if you have a movie like this shown from a stance of political power, it really kind of shows you where the nation, where the political leanings are during that time frame. So this kind of gives us an idea of, is Woodrow Wilson going to help solve the segregation issue? Is Woodrow Wilson going to take a middle line, or is he just going to kind of ignore the facts? So this kind of emphasizes where Woodrow Wilson and the political administration stood at this point, and I'll kind of come back to that a little bit later. In the North, in Boston, we had an individual, a community leader, William Monroe Trotter, who is going to lead a protest to the birth of the nation being shown in Boston. He's actually going to try to work with the mayor to ensure that this movie is not shown in Boston. And when he shows up on the day that it's supposed to be released in theaters, he notices that the mayor kind of went back on his word and the movie is being shown. So he's leading a protest movement, or kind of an activism movement, and trying to get this movie not shown in Boston. He fails on that. So he says, you know what? I'll go and I'll try to watch the movie. I'll try to go purchase a ticket. He's denied the opportunity to purchase a ticket, which gets into a larger brawl in which he and 10 others are harassed by police officers, and then they're eventually arrested because of the quote unquote disturbances that they were causing that day and just trying to purchase a ticket and denied that ticket. Later meetings are held throughout Boston at some locations such as Faneuil Hall, in which they try to again promote and get this movie to not be shown further. However, they fail on this aspect. But even though they fail on this immediate aspect, they show how much people are willing to stand up to try to root out the segregation in Boston and this feeling throughout the nation. Other signs that you're going to run into during this time frame is probably what you're more familiar with, such as what you see on the right, is that you're going to have individual spaces for white audiences and individual spaces for Black audiences. So you're going to have your own water drinking stations. You're going to have your own restrooms, your own entrances to restaurants or places of entertainment. So this is what we're more familiar with when we talk about segregation in the United States. So that is the world in which we are talking about in terms of these individuals, these men who serve in the 372nd Infantry, the men from Company L6, Massachusetts, are navigating, negotiating. They're living in this world, but at the same time, they're saying this can't just be it. What happens if we promote? What happens if we protest? What happens if we agitate? There's got to be something else that we can do to change not only our situation, but ensure that future generations are better off than where we are today. And so this is then going to lead into the conversation where we're slowly going to start boiling back and bringing it back to the military, because during this time frame as well, there are the military is also going to be segregated, where there are 4 individual units, really highlighted by the 24th Infantry, that are going to be primarily Black units during this time frame. So we're talking again about the early 1900s. The 24th U.S. Infantry was organized after the Civil War. They were primarily a peacekeeping leg or arm of the body or arm of the army that was in the Southwest, in the West, to control labor disputes, control mining disputes. And this will also be the unit that is fighting in Cuba at San Juan Hill in 1898. I bring this up because there's an instance in 1917. Again, now we're getting geared up to go into Europe, go into France and fight World War One, or help the French and the British nation fight World War One against the Germans and their allies. And there's this moment about, well, what do you do with the 24th Infantry? Do you send them off to the front? Do you send them to France? Or do you just really keep them at home and they protect the border and they kind of protect from any threats coming from the south or the north? I mean, what do you do with this unit? Eventually, it was decided that they're going to stay homebound, that the black men who are going to be drafted during World War One are actually going to be the men going over to France and Europe. So men in the 24th are going to be staying home. They're going to be stationed home. And in one instance, there's a battalion of the 24th Infantry that gets stationed in Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas has notable Jim Crow laws, again, illustrated here by the colored waiting room sign. And they're going to go in here and really going to ignore these Jim Crow laws. They're going to ignore the colored sections. They're going to ignore the colored water stations. They're going to ignore these signs throughout their deployment here in Houston. They ignored these signs. They destroyed them and eventually got them into a lot of verbal altercations and then a lot of physical fights with not only white patrons, but white police officers in Houston during their time in Texas. And it's really going to explode over one night where there's a large force of the 24th Infantry, this battalion, and a large force of the white population, or large population there in Houston, that are going to get into a fight in which 17 Houston residents were killed and 2 soldiers were also killed that evening. And this brings us to a court case where 63 soldiers were tried. And as a result of this trial, 13 were pretty quickly executed. There was this thought, there was this belief that they wanted to put a solution to this issue really quickly. And since it happened in Texas, since it happened in southern states, they were trying to put a solution that would be seen very very a nice solution for those in the South. So they were trying to appease the South during this time frame. The other individuals who were not executed quickly, they were given prison sentences, and then slowly over time they were given discharge statements. But initially, there is a very real threat, and there's a very real thought that each and every one of these soldiers were going to be quickly executed, or at least executed for what happened in Houston. Eventually, the War Department came out and concluded that the ultimate cause of this riot were racial. Certain men of the 24th Infantry apparently resolved to assert what they believed to be their rights as American citizens and United States soldiers. They failed, and in some cases refused to obey local laws and regulations affecting their race. And again, I just want to highlight that one quote where it says apparently resolved to assert, almost like saying that they should have obeyed the laws. They thought that they were higher than the law. They thought that these laws could be changed with their individual actions. And it really seemed from that quote itself that the War Department was not on the side of their soldiers, essentially, that they were agreeing with the Southern sentiment throughout the South. And that sentiment throughout the South is summarized and just kind of very much believed through the eyes of Senator James K. Vardaman from Mississippi, who spoke universal military service, that millions of Negroes who come under this measure will be armed. I know of no greater menace to the South than this. So he's saying that their life, their culture, their society is going to be threatened if you have a large standing military of African American men. So this is the thought, this is kind of the sentiment spreading throughout the South. And this, again, is just kind of that, it gives us that context of the war in which these men are about to fight, these African American men who join the 372nd in World War One. I'm sorry. And so before we get into their actions, you may be asking, you may be thinking, well, what is it? Why did they continually want to fight for the United States? This flag that is set up to almost set them up for failure. The society that considers them secondary citizens, essentially. And there's going to be some skepticism. There is going to be some skepticism. One individual is going to say they are saying a great deal about democracy in Washington news, but while they are talking about fighting for freedom and the stars and stripes, here at home, the whites apply the torch to the black man's homes and bullets, clubs, and stones to their bodies. So essentially, they're asking, what are we fighting for if this is how we're being treated at home? However, on the opposite end, you do have those individuals, you do have that Black community who's saying we need to fight in this war because, again, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the future is going to hold. So they are saying, we were with you at Bunker Hill and at New Orleans. We want to be with you in France and on the seas. Another individual is going to say, if we can do things on the battlefront, if we can make ourselves felt, then I'm sure it will be the biggest step toward our equalization as citizens. And this is very reminiscent to the words that the 54th Massachusetts are saying in terms of being treated as equal citizens, equal soldiers during the American Civil War and then afterwards. And now this is a general view, as it says, of Camp Devens in Ayer, Massachusetts. Again, this is where that National Guard unit's going to be. This is going to be where they're stationed at before they get shipped to Virginia. And this is going to be a training camp for both Black and white residents of Massachusetts, of which about 190,000 men and women from Massachusetts served during World War One. They served in labor regiments, they served in quartermaster units, they served in medical corps, YMC positions, and of course, again, on the front lines. When men marched off to war, women would take upon their role or take their role in places like Boston and like elsewhere, becoming workers or laborers in industry. They would be keeping phone lines open. Essentially, they'd be working in numerous capacities to make sure that society functioned. So, again, there is an element that I just won't be touching on a whole bunch when these men march off to war. From Camp Devens, they go to Camp Stewart in Newport News, Virginia. And I kind of pause here because I wonder if there's any sort of just thought process that's going on between these men when they are stationed here at Camp Stewart for 3 months. Not only was Camp Stewart named after a Confederate general, J.E.B. Stuart, but Hampton Roads, if you're familiar with the American Civil War era, it is going to be important for events such as the Battle of Big Bethel, the Battle of the Merrimack and Monitor. It's going to be in 1861 where the contraband decision was at Fort Monroe, which is a national park site, notably known or called as Freedom's Fortress. I mean, it has all these different elements in terms of history and foundations and inspiration for these men who are joining World War One to say, I'm walking in the footsteps of those who came before me, and I'm just where I'm at now because of the sacrifices that they made, because of the progress that they made. What is my duty to, again, make these strides going forward? So I haven't found anything yet, and I would be curious if there's anything out there about those individuals making that connection. So they go from Camp Stewart. They're there for about 3 months. They're here doing training, lectures, they're digging trenches, they're practicing for what is needed when they go overseas. Uh, but again, they are going to face some racial stereotypes here in segregated places here while stationed at Camp Stewart. They're going to have lesser clothes, lesser quality clothes. They're going to have divided barracks, segregated barracks. For those who don't have barracks prepared, they're going to be forced to sleep out in tents and some in cold weather. And it's just going to be a lot of what you see in society brought upon these military places. And as a result of Houston, again, from that riot in 1917 in those battalion of the 24th Infantry, and as a result of that riot, there is now going to be a ratio that needs to be accepted or needs to be in place, we'll say, for Southern communities and Southern cities to feel safe. And there's this fear that if you have more Black men with arms and access to weapons, that they're going to rampage the South. Kind of that fear that was embedded in that movie, A Birth of a Nation. So they're going to say that we need a larger population here, a larger fighting force, a larger watchful force to ensure that what happened in Houston doesn't happen elsewhere, like Newport News, on a larger scale. So there's one instance in which there's a Southern camp where it has about 7,000 African American soldiers compared to 50,000 white soldiers. So that just gives you an indication of this ratio, how individuals in the South and these Southern communities needed to feel safe, and how this idea of military barracks, military camps spread throughout the South was sold to these Southern communities. After their training here, they board transport ships like the one seen here. And the fun fact here about the USS Leviathan, it is not only a captured German transport vessel, but it is also the vessel that the surviving members of the 372nd are going to be aboard when it ships them or brings them back home to the United States from France. So even though this is not the transport ship that these men would have taken over to France, this is the one that they would have boarded to come home to the United States after their service. But the USS Leviathan is just one example of multiple transport ships that were captured, that were German, and then repurposed to send troops overseas, and then, like I said, bring them home. Uh, they arrived in France in mid March 1918. And much like previous generations, again, I'm just going to connect to the 54th Massachusetts because I'm using that as a connection point. Just like the men in the 54th Massachusetts, initially they are used as laborers, they're used as a labor force. There is still some thought, much like what you've seen during the American Civil War, that they don't know if they can fight as well as a white individual. There is some belief that they are to remove white individuals from labor services so that way those white soldiers can fight on the front lines. Essentially, it's just this way, again, as forecasting or really broadcasting how society is in the relationship between black and white citizens and how they want it to also be the same way in the military. So there are about 400,000 African Americans who are drafted or enlist or in some way or another overseas during World War One. Of that 400,000, about 380,000, roughly 80%, are going to be used for labor battalions, stevedoers. They're going to be those who serve in the services of supply, the SOS. They're going to be salvage companies. They're going to be those individuals who really ensure a military unit on the front are set up for success. These are individuals who, again, pictured here, that you can see here, are going to unload ships, get it on trains, and get it to the front lines for those soldiers who are fighting. This is 80% of the men, the African American men, who are going to serve in World War One. Again, they're engineers, labor battalions, supporting roles. After the war, they're also going to be primarily used for those big cemeteries that you see overseas in France. So they do have a lot of supporting roles during this time frame. The two divisions that again encompass that 20,000 or that 20% that roughly fight in the front lines is the 92nd Division and the 93rd Division. The 93rd Division is which the 372nd are attached to. But initially, if we go back, again, the 372nd are used as labor battalions at first. And eventually there's some tension between white officers there and this black fighting force that eventually they send the 372nd to the front line, get them on trains, and send them to the front. But I just want to pause here real quick because there are engineers and there are labor battalions who are stuck here at St. Nazaire, and they're going to say the spirit of St. Nazaire is the spirit of the South. And that kind of should indicate how they're being treated in France, how they're being treated by white officers, how they're being treated by the military at large, that they're calling the spirit of St. Nazaire is the spirit of the South. So they do have to put up with this extra set or extra feeling of torment, this extra feeling of abuse. And there's a lot of abuse that goes on here, verbal and physical. And then eventually, or just to kind of sum it up, just the segregation between white officers and then the black labor battalion. So there's a lot of tension here, and there's a lot of sentiment here about how soldiers view their experience based on their relationship or based on their interactions with white officers during this time frame. But to the front lines, here's a picture of one of the regiments who are going to serve on the front lines in World War One. And I will say that the majority of the pictures that I do find the National Archives has easily accessible on their digital repository are going to be of the 369th Infantry. They are going to be well known just because of their initial actions. They are going to be well known because they participate in some of the early actions of the American forces during World War One, and eventually because of the narratives that are written about them afterwards, the hard fights that they face afterwards. And when we compare that to the service of the 372nd, the 372nd is doing a lot of jumping back and forth. They're going to the front lines, manning the front lines for a couple weeks. Then on rotation, they're coming back at the end, taking up their rest and relaxation. That's kind of their role for the majority of their time in France. And remember, they did not get to France until mid-March 1918. And if we remember that World War I ends November 1918, they're only there for about 6, 7 months. So they're there to constantly rotate out. They're there to help with patrols, and I'll get into patrols in just a little bit. But their time in France is very limited. Just one element that I'd like to talk about or just mention briefly before we get into their experience is that the 92nd and 93rd Division, there was some questions about what exactly to do with this all black divisions or with these all black divisions from the overall commander, John J. Pershing, who is the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces or the AEF. There's some pushback or there's kind of some thought that he should not put these divisions on the front lines. There's some thought that they should just be used for labor purposes. But at the same time, their allies in this war, the French, they're asking for more men. So General Pershing finds a solution and he's going to loan both these divisions out to the French army during their time in France. And the 93rd Division, again, which the 372nd are attached to, they're going to be part of the 157th Red Hand Infantry Division, and they would serve under French command through the duration of the war. And then this is where they start jumping back and forth in the trench line, relieving French forces, learning how to fight French techniques, and even exchange their United States American military uniform pieces for that of the French army. So gas masks, helmets, uniforms, cartridge boxes, weapons. They're exchanging United States weapons for French weapons. But before they go, or as they're being transferred or loaned, there is a memo that is sent to the French command from the War Department, and this memo is called Concerning Black Americans. The memo asks French commands to follow United States social structures and to not treat black soldiers as equals. And this is a quote. This indulgence on their part and this familiarity profoundly hurts the Americans. They consider it a blow to their national doctrine. They fear that contact with French will fill American Negroes with ideas which the whites consider intolerable. So essentially, they're asking that when with these black divisions being in French command or French control, they're asking them to abide by American social structure. And during this time frame, the same social structure is not set up in France. In fact, in the French army, they are using African units on the front line. They don't have any ill thoughts towards black men fighting on the front lines comparable to American forces. So they do have that kind of not directive, but voice in the back of their head that they're given by the American War Department. And I just want to say that during the same time, here's some thoughts that are going on as this memo is being released. In Georgetown, or I'm sorry, in a Georgia town, a mayor's saying that you boys are going to fight for your country and for democracy, and that is a very fine thing. But there is one idea some of you have been expressing, and I wanted to get it out of your minds. Don't think that after the war you are going to change things. Don't get any newfangled ideas about democracy. And this is the social structure that that memo was setting up, is that they are a certain class in the United States, and they shouldn't be told any differently. These black men should not be told any differently during their time in France serving with the French command. The Germans also are playing into this because they're going to drop pamphlets and letters over American lines, and they are going to ask these black soldiers what they are fighting for and who they are fighting for. These pamphlets are going to read, "What is democracy? It's personal freedom, all citizens enjoying the same rights socially and before the law. Do you enjoy the same rights as white people in America, the land of freedom and democracy? Or aren't you rather treated over there as second class citizens?" And as we know, with some of these pamphlets dropped during other wars, it's to lead to demoralization. It's kind of lead to a lack of fighting spirits, and it's led to eat away and corrode at the fighting spirit of these individuals who might have a thought in the back of their head saying, maybe these pamphlets are right. maybe these pamphlets are saying the world of which I'm going to go back to, that my service here or their service here is not going to impact change. So that's the point of these leaflets being dropped behind American lines. And those are the three different viewpoints that these men are receiving on the front line from the War Department, Southern towns, such as exampled by that Georgia town, and then from Germans dropping these leaflets behind American lines. But you get into the thing aspect. And again, this is going to be another picture of the 369th, and it gives you a better indication about their helmets, the French helmet, their cartridge boxes. And I guess if this was a colored picture, it would be mustard uniforms. And that would be what you were looking at here if this was not a black and white picture. So again, they enter the war late. They don't come over until March, April 1918. And that really means that they're going to only have one big thrust or one big front in front of them. But outside of that, they're going to participate just like any other American unit or any other French unit would be, which means they're going to be performing patrols. And here's some quotes of some historians who describe it and some men who are on the front lines who describe it. They're going to be the objective of these patrols was to take by storm, if necessary, any positions occupied by the enemy patrols, gain information, and make prisoners. The men were divided into smaller groups and received instructions in various methods of patrolling, crawling through underbrush, getting from one trench and shell hole to another, snipe shooting, barbed wire cutting, and hand to hand combat. So, again, those are just two different descriptions of what the patrols meant and what patrols were. Their major action took place in late September, early October 1918, and this is going to be in the Champagne area, and this is going to last roughly 9 days. On September 28th, they're going to have their over the top moment, and this has been seen in movies and other pictures where a whistle's blown and all the men gather up their weapons and they start making their way up the trench and then making their way over no man's land toward the enemy position. So on September 28th, this is their over the top moment. Germans in this sector fought fiercely, one describes, giving back volley for volley, but the fierceness of the fresh troopers attacking and the timely artillery fire provided too much for the German morale, and the cultured, spelled with a K, troops turned again and fled in disorder, followed by these regiments who were following up their victory. Again, that's on September 28th. Their ultimate objective was a small little town or an area known as Montreuil, and they are going to look at this area for the better part of 2-3 days, roughly October 3rd through October 5th, October 4th, October 5th, with their purpose of capturing this town, this area. On one of those events, after their over the top moment, after these men, the 372nd, have dug in, they are going to be attacked by a German army force that's going to try to retake their position or take back this position from the 372nd. And this is going to be unsuccessful. And this is really going to be the farthest front of this unit, of this regiment during World War One. One person even describes their heroic efforts here as, but the black heroes maintained the positions they had taken at such sacrifice of blood and men. When they were relieved on October 6th / October 7th, they had suffered 81 killed and 467 wounded. And again, this is early October, so we're right around the corner where the end of World War I is coming. Of course, these men don't know that, but looking at it at hindsight, this is their shining moment. This week, this 9-day period is their shining moment. And before we move on and kind of describe what happens, what they're coming home to, they leave a lot of visuals about their time in France, fighting on the front lines. And they're going to share similar sentiments that we're all aware of. They're going to be in these trenches day in, day out. There's going to be mud built up. There's going to be water built up. There's going to be lice and rats running rampant. And it's just going to be deplorable conditions at best. They're going to describe no man's land. They're going to describe it as fields were dotted with shell holes, and the few trees and bushes were almost entirely stripped of their foliage, and branches by the poisonous gases, shrapnel, and other destructives thrown over by the German artillery. During their time here, just like other units, American units, French units, German units, they're going to experience aerial raids. They're going to experience artillery bombardments that last hours and hours and hours, all for the purpose of softening their enemy's position, for the purpose of going over the top, taking that position, fortifying that position, and then moving on. World War I becomes a slog for these individuals who fought in this war. So again, they just share similar experiences that are felt by everyone. At the end of their service, um, these men are going to be decorated and they're going to be commanded or commended by the French command. French General Goubet is going to say, the 157th Division, I will never forget that irresistible dash, the heroic push of the colored American regiments on the Crête des Observatoires and in the Plan of Montois, the most formidable defenses, the best organized machine gun nests, the most smashing artillery barrages could not stop them. These elite regiments crossed all of it with superb disdain of death, and thanks to their courageous devotion, the Red Hand Division, during 9 days of hard struggle, always held the lead in the historic advance of the Fourth Army. And this is more than what they'll receive from American leadership. French Colonel Guillet, commander of the 157th Division, he's going to say that during these 9 days of hard fighting, not only did they properly organize their defenses, but they took nearly 600 prisoners, captured 15 guns, and nearly 150 machine guns. They secured enormous amount of engineering materials and important supplies. They brought down enemy airplanes. And he's going to finish it off with this line. He says, the red hand sign of the division, thanks to you, became a bloody hand which took the Boche by the throat and made him cry for mercy. You have well avenged our glorious deed. And again, that's going to be accolades given to these men from the French commanders. They're also going to be receiving individual command or individual accolades, such as this medal right here. And I'm probably going to botch the name, but the Croix de Guerre with palm. This is given to individuals and military units, and the citation is for bravery or courage shown in the front of battle. And then individuals are also going to receive awards. These two individuals here on the left is Corporal Clarence Van Allen. He's going to receive a Distinguished Service Cross from the United States of America on July 9th, 1918. And it is going to be cited for extraordinary heroism in action while serving with Company L, 372nd Infantry Regiment, 93rd Division, AEF, near Bussy Farm, France. Private Van Allen, unassisted, rushed an enemy machine gun, putting it out of action and capturing 3 prisoners. The gentleman on the right, Sergeant Clifton Merriam, is also going to receive the Distinguished Service Cross, July 9th, 1918, for action near Bussy Farm. Corporal Merriman attacked with hand grenades an enemy machine gun, which was causing heavy losses to his platoon, and succeeded in killing the gunner and putting the gun out of action. He then organized the remainder of the platoon and led them to their positions in the trenches south of Bussy Farm. So again, these are individual actions, men who served with 372nd, almost through their individual actions, similar to what the men of the 54th Massachusetts said, that will fight. These racial stereotypes, they're wrong. They don't speak truth. And when given opportunities, we will show our valor on the front lines. That is what these men proved during their service in World War I. After they come home, they're marching home, and I love this picture because this is a picture of those veterans marching on Beacon Street, and in the top right-hand corner, you can see the 54th Massachusetts Memorial, the Robert Gould Shaw Memorial, and these men are marching past it much as the veterans of the 54th would have marched past, much as those men of the 54th who would have marched by this section on their front off to war. So they're coming home. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, they're coming home to a world where they are trying to see if change really is happening, if change is really accessible to these individuals, excuse me, who served during World War One. They see successes from previous generations, so they know that there can be successes. It's just how long will they be long term? They're given a warning by Secretary of War Baker. Baker is going to say, now I want to impress upon you men that if you feel things have not been as you would like them, if there have been some things which you think were not as they should have been, you must try to forget them and get back to civil life with the determination to do your part to make the country what it should be. So he's kind of saying two things here, is that how you were treated, you should forget how you were treated. However, he's also saying that work towards the world in which you want to see. So he's kind of giving these individuals and the men here a guiding light saying, change it. If there's something wrong here, change it. And that's the quote again from Secretary of War Baker. But when they come home and after they get settled and after celebrations, they're going to notice that the world has not change, that this world must be made safe for democracy. They're kind of questioning, well, whose democracy? Who's going to be allowed for that democracy? And this brings us then to the summer of 1919, known as the Red Summer, which riots are going to take place across the United States in 26 cities, leading to lynchings, beatings, imprisonment, to reassert social norms. So individuals, they're going to stand up for themselves. This is going to be noted by one historian who's going to say that these individuals are no longer going to back down from challenges of re-emphasizing or kind of trying to reassert white societal norms on these individuals who are coming home. So these men are coming home standing very proud with their military uniforms on. Unfortunately, sometimes those individuals are going to be targeted and are going to be beaten, such as the case of Daniel Mack, who allegedly told a white resident that he fought in France and would no longer take mistreatment from whites. And for this, Daniel Mack was beaten to death. There are other riots throughout the United States as well. Most notably, you're going to see them in Chicago and then in Washington, D.C. And this quote that I'm going to read about the riot in Washington, D.C. just kind of brings home some issues that I talk about during the 19th century and American Civil War. This quote reads: "The relatives of returned Negro soldiers have were beaten and killed on the streets of Washington, right in front of the White House, under the dome of the capital of the greatest republic on earth, a republic that went to war to beat down injustice and make the world safe for democracy. Has the head of the nation offered one word of condemnation of the mob? If so, we have failed to see it." And that's a reaction to the a riot that's going on in Washington D.C. And again, that quote really jumps out to me because it reminds me of studying uh, the institution of slavery in Washington D.C. and how slavery, not only individuals were sold in Washington D.C. again underneath this Capitol. If we go back to this quote, a republic meant to make the world safe for democracy, that behind the dome, behind these white cladded buildings, these stone buildings, that there's a very dark underside to our history. One being the history of slavery, one being this history of race riots in 1919, and a larger story of segregation here in the United States. And then there is a soldier who writes to W.B. Du Bois who says, "Why can't we have democracy in the United States and under the flag of which I fight?" Kind of the sentiment of, what did I fight for? That's kind of what they're questioning here. Is that if I come home to the United States, shouldn't I have the same rights to democracy here? And these riots are not only happening elsewhere, is that these riots are giving life to news articles that you see here that is saying one or two individuals in some sort of crime spree that is going on or some sort of murder. It is almost the foment or the front is the first part of a riot that's about to explode here in northern states such as Massachusetts. So they kind of use language as a way to maintain the division between white culture and then black culture and black society here, even in northern states. And that brings me to the last slide here as America 250 and the legacy. What are the legacy of these men? What was the legacy that these men carry forward from the 54th Massachusetts? How did they make their own inroads? How did these men make the world safe for democracy? Because even if it wasn't quote unquote made safe for democracy immediately, they are agitating and promoting for change, not only through their military service, but what individuals do after the war, organizing small veterans organizations or helping run veterans organizations or AFW posts. These individuals are leaving a lasting legacy kind of for all of us to reflect on and saying, where are we today as we remember American democracy, the ideals and the foundations of the American Republic or the United States from the Declaration of Independence, and really kind of questioning, where are these bumps in the road? Where are we in history? And kind of where are we today? So just kind of leaving you off with that thought after going over the experience of the 372nd, these men who from Company L, 6th Massachusetts National Guard, served in their time in France, and then also kind of reflecting on legacy. How are we going to remember these individuals, either through memorials, through history books, through whatever the means possible, and what they can kind of teach us, provide strength, foundation for, provide an outlook for, support for in making the next 250 something that is really going to guide us towards a more perfect union. And that is all I have for you.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, Nathan. That was definitely enlightening for myself. I did not know as much about participation in World War One, um, especially African American soldiers. So really do appreciate you sharing that and providing that context. Okay, so did have a couple questions come in. So did have a question. One of the first ones was early on in the presentation. So, asking about Woodrow Wilson resegregating the armed services and questioning how aware folks were when they were enlisting.
I'm sorry. It sounds like so these individuals who were being drafted are enlisting how aware they were of the segregated units.
Correct.
Yeah, so my understanding would be I think they're very well aware of the division within the military. I haven't ran into anything primary evidence saying one thing or the other, but all the research that I've read, the secondary resources, the news articles that are out there, I think there's a heavy indication that they're aware that they're going to be segregated units. I mean, there is an entire officer camp and an entire officer school set up in Des Moines purely for the purpose of training black officers for World War One. So I think they're very aware that when they enter the service, they're going to be seen and going to be put into another group, not with the white officers, not with the white soldiers, but they probably also know that they will not only have black officers, that they'll have white officers as well. So I think there is awareness going on.
Got it. Next question. And I think this is, do you know how long the voyage was from in during their journey when they took the ship from, you know, the United States over to Europe? How long roughly that journey was?
I want to say a couple weeks because there's actually a great resource. There's a JSTOR article written about a Bruce Wright, um, who is living in Cambridge after his time in World War One, and he kind of leaves a diary of his experiences during this time period. So he leaves a diary of his service and this journey overseas. So I think it's at least a couple weeks, and he talks about the turbulence on the seas, and then eventually pulling in. So I want to say at least a couple weeks.
Do you know if there are any records of African American soldiers who remained in France after the war?
I do not know of any. I'm sure there is, though. The only issue with that is, can I speak French or can I read French afterwards? So I think that that would be the difficulty I would run into. Um, but what I found out in terms of finding primary sources here, they're few and far between. So I imagine the same complications, the same problems would arise for historical resources and historical things in French archives as well.
Awesome. Um, okay, so let's do, I think we have time for probably two more. So you mentioned that women took on many jobs to keep things running on the home front. Did that include black women as well?
The one thing that I found, and again, since this wasn't a big part of the conversation, I kind of focused on the fighting aspect, is that they were denied jobs in places like Charlestown. So there was a call that went up for white women to perform tasks in the Charlestown Navy Yard, such as phone operators. But when black women tried to offer their own services, they were denied. So that's kind of as far as I found that, as far as I got to in terms of the home front.
Okay. All right, and then um, let's take one more here so we can wrap up on time. Do you know or are you aware of, based on some of the sources you consulted, what African American soldiers thought about French culture?
Didn't run into anything on that. No, I didn't. I didn't find anything on that. I think they were very uh, pleasantly surprised in some aspects and how they were treated, how they were trained, and just like any sort of language barrier, it was hard for them to learn just the language aspect. Uh,
Mhm.
but from my understanding and from kind of how I understood the relationship, they were very amenable to one another. There was very little tension.
Cool. All right. Well, Nathan, thanks again. Sorry we couldn't get to every single question here, but in the interest of time, we are gonna wrap it up and can turn it back over to Karen.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, I'm just still processing. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Um, Honestly, now I have like a few things to look up. I'm like, I'm gonna go down this weird rabbit hole of World War One and soldiers. This was absolutely incredible. Thank you again, Ranger Nathan. Nathan, loved it. I know you said you haven't presented in a little bit, but I think you should keep doing it. And again, thank you everyone so much for joining us this evening. And our next one is February 25th. And I believe it is about donation people, the refugees from the siege of Boston, because that anniversary is coming up. Anyway, thank you guys so much, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your night.